I would like. And we're going to go ahead and start with the Ms. Solano with anything she has to tell us from the mayor. Any messages from the mayor? Go ahead, Ms. Solano.
Thank you, Madam Chair and City Council, Mayor Gratis. I have a couple of city updates this evening. The first is that the mayor did extend the weather emergency for opening of the overnight warming shelter through Sunday morning, this next Sunday. So it's open this entire week due to the really cold weather in the at night. And then secondly, I'll move on to the upcoming retreat for City Council. They're planning a retreat for 2024, your retreat. I met with Madam Chair, Councilor, and she, I think, schedules February 3rd, 2024. Breakfast will be here. It's the entire retreat will be here in the chambers. So staff will be ready to come to facilitate taking of the minutes and transferring of the slide deck presentations. The agenda is still being processed. I think the beginning agenda item will start at 8:30, but we'll be here and ready to go with some breakfast items at 8. And she asked that you plan for the majority of the day for an adjournment somewhere between 2 and 3 in the afternoon. And she will be sending electronic updates with respect to, I think, the agenda. Do you have anything else there to?
No, I'll just be sending out a email here within the next 24 hours asking what you all would like to discuss and add to the agenda.
And then we'll send out the calendar invite. Tracy or Alyssa will do that as well tomorrow. So that it is on the agenda, your calendars.
Yes, Mr. Hippolyte?
The only thing I would request of council is to not reply all when you respond to what Councilwoman Maestri requests, so we don't inadvertently create a public meeting.
Well, you beat me to the punch because I was going to send them each an individual email.
Oh, okay. Okay, good.
Alrighty, thank you.
And if it helps, Madam Chair, go ahead and just include me in those so I can capture all the replies if it's easier to build the agenda for you.
Thank you, Ms. Solano. I appreciate
And I could share that with everybody else as well.
Thank you.
Okay, secondly, just a reminder that last week, our Director of Public Works notified that the demolition of the fire damaged building, the Albany at 125 East 7th Street is scheduled to begin on the 22nd. It is expected to take 45 days and there will be some closures that happen in that area around the demolition. But I'll remind everyone again next week. So that the citizens can know that it will be happening, and it's good. It's good that it's going to come down. And I don't have any other updates. As soon as I transfer this over to Marissa Stiller, our city clerk, for an election update, that'll conclude city's updates unless you have some direction or questions for me.
Any questions from council? Ms. Martinez.
Ms. Solano, do we
Martinez.
have the numbers from the rescue mission? I'm curious what their like how many clients they've been serving since it's been so tremendously cold. Do we have that data available?
I'll ask for census, but I'll actually ask our police chief, who gets a phone call every night as well. So somebody there might have it. If he doesn't have it right here, he may have it electronically, but I will definitely reach out to them and get those numbers for you. I can send that electronically.
If we could have the amount of slots open versus how many have been taken per night, that would be great. And are they still taking pets? Up to 10 pets per night?
We didn't hear that they weren't. So I know that they try to encourage them to bring in the pets that do arrive, but I do know that they haven't had much success from individuals wanting to leave their pets separate from themselves.
Okay. Councilor Maestri, besides replying to your email, is there anything else that we need to do to prepare for the retreat?
No, not really. We'll go ahead and get the agenda ready and going, and then anything that you want to bring in front of at the retreat. Bring your documentation or anything that you want as far as we'll go ahead and address it. The first part of the retreat is going to be based on housekeeping and going over some policies and procedures and what we would like to see as a collective body moving forward. And then also in our onboarding, Mr. Hippolyte had mentioned a couple of gray areas that maybe he's going to reinstate those and then what they are, and then take direction from us as far as putting something in place so that we can just do some housekeeping. And then from there, we will visit with Action 22 and the chief of police and Mr. Hayes. And then also a little bit on the budget. The budget books will be ready.
Okay, do we need to prepare any of our like priorities for 2024? I know that we've done that in years past.
Yeah, we can, that's what we're going to do.
Okay.
That's, we're going to prepare that. Mhm. Yes. Collectively, we're going to prepare those priorities. Mhm. Anything else? From anyone else?
I just had another work session request. I wanted to see if we could get Co-Create back to talk about all the broadband
Okay.
monies that we heard about the state of the city that we've secured, because I don't think we've had that update yet from Co-Create on what that looks like.
Okay. So we'll get that on and let you know.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Our first guest tonight, we're going to be speaking with Mr. Gil Romero. He's our lobbyist and, oh,
Sorry, they tagged me on to city updates.
I didn't even see you
to-
there. I'm sorry.
No worries. I'm afraid that most of my information is going to be stuff that you may have heard multiple times before, but I'm still trying to publicize it to the public as much. And then just to kind of give everyone an update on the election.
Okay.
So thank you, Chair
Thank you.
Maestri, members of City Council.
See you there.
So again, I want to emphasize that this is a mail ballot only election and there are no in-person voting machines. So the mail ballot is the one that needs to be voted. And if there are any issues with those ballots, voters can come to the city clerk's office at 1 City Hall Place in City Hall. It's the building attached to Memorial Hall. I know we're in that right now, but just in case anyone listening needs to know. They can come and we'll help them out. All of my staff are sworn election judges and can deal with any issues that might come up. Additionally, if anyone needs to register to vote, they can register to vote online or at the county clerk's office. So that to go online, that's the govotecolorado.gov website. And we do recommend that people go to register the day before they want to come and pick up their ballot, mainly because they are not automatically added to the Secretary of State's website when they do register to vote online or at the county clerk's office. So it does take some time for them to show up on those voter rolls for the Secretary of State's office for us to be able to give them a ballot. So I very much encourage everyone to go to register to vote today on their phone right now at govotecolorado.gov. And then you can come tomorrow to my office and pick up your ballot if you want to vote it. It'll be a little warmer tomorrow. So maybe we'll have a few more people coming out. And then the other one I want to make sure that people know is that ballots have to be received by the city clerk's office by 7 p.m. on election day, January 23rd. That's received by the city clerk's office, not received by the post office. So tomorrow is the last day that we recommend people mail their ballots. From then on out, we recommend that they use Dropbox instead so that it will be directly in our hands for the city clerk's office rather than at the post office languishing. So. Next, there are a few ballot issues that my office has heard about. The first is a duplicate ballot, and this is actually the easiest one to fix. If you've received 2 ballots, then go ahead and vote one in the normal way, either by mailing it by tomorrow or by dropping it in one of the 5 Dropbox locations, and then tear up the duplicate or shred the duplicate and throw it away. If you do have a loved one who's now deceased to receive a ballot or along those lines, that is something that needs to be updated in the county clerk's office for future elections. Obviously, any ballot would have already been mailed out for this election, and that should just be disposed of in the same way. If you can shred it or tear it up and then throw it away, that's great. But if you do want to have that updated for the voter registration list for future elections, that is something that will need to be done with the county clerk's office. If you have a missing ballot, you can come request it from the city clerk's office in person. This is now the end of the period. Yesterday was the last day that we could legally mail out ballots to people who needed replacement ballots. So now all replacement ballots will need to be in person. So we do encourage people to come on down. We can get it for you usually in about 10 minutes. But we do want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to vote and that they can come to our office with their ID and fill out their form really quick, and we can, if they want to vote it right there and put it in the Dropbox, they can be done. So, and then we did discuss the unsigned affidavit of voter, and I wanted to bring that up again to address it a little further. If you did not fill that out and already submitted your ballot, don't worry about it. We'll deal with it when we get it. If not, please do fill that out, and we will appreciate everyone that makes sure to see it, because I know it is different. And finally, here are those 24-hour Dropbox locations again. So it's the Colorado State Fairgrounds on Prairie Avenue, Colorado State University Pueblo across from Gonzalez Drive, the Pueblo County Elections Office on Main Street, the Pueblo County Courthouse on Court Street, and then the Lamb Branch Library. So you can still mail it back in again with a forever stamp on that top right-hand corner throughout tomorrow. But again, one of these 5 Dropbox locations are recommended if you're not mailing it off by tomorrow. And again, the city clerk's office also does have a Dropbox at our location, which is open during our normal business hours. And then finally, we added how to find your election results on January 23rd. So the first set of unofficial incomplete results will be posted around 7:30 p.m. and they'll be posted on the city's website. There'll be a big button on the homepage so you can go directly to that information. And then it will also be posted on the city social media, that's Facebook, Instagram, and X. So we expect to have that first incomplete unofficial results pretty quickly. And then we are hoping that we will have a second update later that night, ideally with all of the ballots checked in. But if it has to go to a second day, then we'll do that too, and probably just post another one with the knowledge that we'll have to go back and finish counting the next day for the full unofficial results. And then obviously we have to wait a couple days for any UOCAVA ballots. Those are the overseas voters. They have a little extra time for those ballots to come back before we have the official final results. I'm happy to take any questions that council may have or think that citizens may have that should be further addressed.
Any questions for Ms. Dolan? President Taylor?
Maybe you said it, but I didn't hear it. How many ballots have been turned in so far?
We've had
Roughly.
about 3,900.
3,900.
Sorry, no, excuse me, 13,900.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes.
Anyone else? I guess we'll move on to our Are you done, Ms. Solano? Okay, yes. We'll move on to our next guest, and that is Mr. Gil Romero. He's our lobbyist. Hello, Mr. Romero.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening to everyone. I know there's some new members on City Council. This is the Capital Success Group. We're going to do a short presentation for you today, a little bit longer than what our presentations will be for you on Mondays. They'll usually be pretty precise, 15 minutes to talk to you about significant legislation that has impact on the city of Pueblo. Just to bring everybody up to speed, we were privileged to represent the city of Pueblo last year in the 2023 session for about 2 months. We followed one bill that was House Bill 1294. It was entitled Pollution Protection Measures. And we were brought on specifically because this bill, if as introduced, would have had significant impact to Evraz Pueblo Steel Plant. Because of your efforts and the advocacy of the city of Pueblo and Evraz and their lobbying team and other stakeholders, we were able to significantly amend this bill. I will tell you that even after it was amended and at least for the city of Pueblo and for Evraz, it didn't have the kind of dramatic impact. The bill still implemented meaningful reforms, including an improved public complaint process for air quality concerns with stronger penalties for violations and rulemaking. It also established this interim committee, and one of the things that we were able to successfully lobby was that this bill did not have bill authority. That is, the interim committee took testimony this summer. But there will be some air quality bills potentially that could impact industry in Pueblo, and we'll be following that. So that brings us up to this legislative session for 2024. And as I said, we are excited for the new members, and for those of you that don't know the Capital Success Group. All three of us were born and raised in Pueblo, and it's a privilege for us to represent the city of Pueblo. As we approach the 2024 session, there are some things that we're going to ask of City Council so that as we proceed with the 120-day session with a number of bills that will be introduced, we're going to be asking for your input. As you know, Colorado Municipal League and other stakeholders, including our legislative delegation, will ask you to take positions on particular legislation. And during our presentations on Monday, we'll try to do what we call our high priority list for the city. Ryan and Alec will explain our bill tracker that we will submit to you every week so that you can take a look at. And that bill tracker will also prioritize the bills that we believe should be receive the highest attention for City Council, but you may see others that you may want to put up on that priority list. One of the things and these are questions we're asking this evening that you can think about and then get back to us on. One of the suggestions that we had during our presentation on bidding for this contract is one of the things we had asked, and we would ask you again, would it be helpful during our 15-minute presentations to every week at least ask one of our members of the Pueblo delegation or Southern Colorado delegation to take a little bit of our time to talk about their priorities. And so they would come on during our Zoom presentation and talk about their priorities. So that's something for you to consider. We also hope because of the new members on City Council and the new president, Aleph, that we'd like to come down in person sometime this month during our 15-minute presentation to do our presentation on the bills that have been introduced, and we're asking you to prioritize. The other thing that we would ask you to consider is that on February 15th, Colorado Municipal League is doing their reception and their legislative workshop. One of the things that we had suggested during our presentation is that does the city want to do a Pueblo City Day at the Capitol, where our delegation, our City Council, our president and mayor would come up for that workshop. It also would be there would be a reception or lunch with our legislators at the Capitol and an opportunity to meet with other legislators during that date. So that's February 15th. The other thing that we will ask during our 15-minute presentations is if there's a particular bill that you're really interested in and you have a real concern about, we want this year, because we're not just following one bill, we'll be following several bills, and probably a prioritized list of bills, is whether or not you would like to testify on a particular bill. One of the positive things that came out of COVID is that you don't have to drive all the way to Denver to present testimony. You can do that virtually, and you can do it if the city has taken a position or as an individual member of City Council if you feel strongly about a position, and we will coordinate that testimony. And or if there's a bill that you would like to listen to, then we will send that link to you the day that bill is presented. So that's sort of the process part of what we're doing. You can expect that during our 15-minute presentations on Mondays, they'll be pretty tight. That we'll be really trying to prioritize the most significant bills that were introduced and their impact on the city of Pueblo. Based upon opening day and the governor's state of the state, it's clear that the top priorities this next year, or in this current legislative session, are housing, and housing. They introduced a land use bill last year that failed. It was a comprehensive land use bill. They've broken it up into smaller parts. I think there's some components to these smaller parts where the city can avail itself of grants for housing. We're going to be following those to make sure that the requirements and criteria fit the city of Pueblo. So we'll be following that. The one bill that was introduced this past week that moved through the process, it was actually passed last year, has, I think, a significant impact on the city of Pueblo, is the earned income tax credit. It passed last year, but there's a constitutional challenge to it. This really is an important one for lower income working families in Pueblo, has a significant impact. That bill probably will get to the governor probably within a couple of weeks. You've also heard a little bit about the front range passenger rail plan. As you know, the feds have approved $66 billion, and the state got a boost when we were selected as one of the routes. Obviously, they're going to start the northern route of that rail, but as the governor said in his state, he feels like passenger rail is within our reach. So we'll see where that goes. I'm going to turn it over to Ryan and Alec to talk to you a little bit about some of the bills we've already got on your bill tracker, and talk to you about how you can use that bill tracker effectively, and all of the information that you can glean from that.
Okay, thanks, Gil. Good evening, City Council and Mr. Mayor. My name is Ryan Romero. I'm going into my fifth session, fifth legislative session, and I'm really looking forward to getting to work for the city of Pueblo. I just want to briefly talk about our bill tracker. It's a piece of software that we use to keep track of all the bills for the city of Pueblo. It's really easy to use. On your end, it'll just be a link that you click on. We'll send it with, some weeks it'll be multiple documents, but at least once a week we'll send you a document with the bills that we want you to take a look at, and you'll have our bill tracker link that will have all of the bills that we're following. So it's as simple as clicking on that link. It'll take you to our website, and from that website you can look at all of the different bills. It has a short description of the bill. Depending on if we take a position on the bill, it'll tell us, it'll display that. It'll tell you the date the bill was introduced, when the next hearing is, where it is in the process, whether it's in the House, the Senate, or it's already made it through both houses and is sitting on the governor's desk. And from there, you can also look at all of the documents attached to the bill, whether it's the fiscal note, all the different sponsors, all the different committees that it has been through, and the votes on those committees. So we think it's easy to use, but we would encourage you to try it out, and please reach out with any questions you have. Since we're through the first week now, it's already been populated with about 100 bills. There's 120 bills total that have been introduced, and I think in our tracker for the city of Pueblo we have around 70. So we don't expect you to look at all of them. I think that's part of our job, is to pick out the highest priority ones, and that's what we'll send you. But this is just a tool to keep you more informed, and it has a ton of information, so we encourage you to use it. But like I said, please reach out with any questions on the bill tracker or any of the individual pieces of legislation. With that, unless there's any questions about that, I'm going to pass it to Alec to highlight a couple of bills that have already been introduced. Thank you.
Good evening to the members of City Council and staff. Alec Romero with Capital Success Group. It is a pleasure to be here tonight with you all. As Ryan mentioned, the bill tracker will allow you all to help us prioritize legislation as we navigate through this session. There's over 130 bills that have been introduced so far, and by the end of session, this usually amounts to almost 600 bills. Tonight, I would like to bring to your attention a couple of different bills that have already been introduced, and they may have an impact to the city. The first bill is House Bill 24-1007, prohibit residential occupancy limits. This bill would prohibit local governments from enacting or enforcing residential occupancy limits regardless of familial relationship, unless those limits are tied to a minimum square footage per person requirement that is necessary to regulate safety, health, and welfare. The next bill focuses on water conservation. It's a policy that was moved forward by the interim committee in the legislature. It's Senate Bill 24005, prohibit landscaping practices for water conservation. On and after January 1st, 2025, the bill prohibits local governments from allowing the installation, planting, or placement of non-functional turf, artificial turf, or invasive plant species on commercial, institutional, or industrial property or a transportation corridor. The term non-functional turf in this context really refers to turf that is primarily ornamental and situated in an area adjacent to a street, a sidewalk, a driveway, parking lot, frontage area, or median, and it lacks regular use for civic, community, or recreational purposes. So the exceptions to this bill is turf located in parks, sports fields, and playgrounds. So the impact, it's anticipated that this will increase the workload and cost to local governments through various different mechanisms. Firstly, local authorities will be tasked with updating ordinances and regulations to align with the prohibition on artificial turf, involving responding to complaints, investigating potential violations, and taking necessary enforcement actions. Secondly, future landscaping projects may incur higher costs for local governments as they will need to bear the expenses related to the installation and maintenance of those alternative surfaces. To mitigate some of these costs, the local governments may consider enforcing new fines or fees associated with the restrictions outlined in this bill. In addition to these two bills that I briefly just mentioned, we've been involved in some early stakeholder discussions surrounding some pieces of the housing legislation that we anticipate to be introduced this session. Until these bills have been introduced, there could be several components of the policy that will change, and we will work to keep you apprised of that information. Some of these bills include legislation regarding ADUs, transit-oriented development, strategic growth plans, single entry stairway for multifamily, and a bill on parking requirements. We don't have any details on that parking requirement bill yet. But throughout the session, we'll continue to summarize these key pieces of legislation and try to give you guys an understanding of the impacts and provide reports for you all to review ahead of these work sessions. This will help to inform us on bill tracking and give you the opportunity to provide feedback and questions pertaining to policies being proposed at the legislature. If there are any questions, we would be happy to answer or follow up with you all. Thank you for your attention.
And just to finish up our presentation, there is one other bill that we know that there have been a couple of articles in the Chieftain about regarding nuclear energy and Comanche 3. Bill was introduced. It's Senate Bill 9, I believe. Senate Bill 9. Is that right? I just want to make sure.
Senate Bill 39.
Excuse me, Senate Bill 39. We've been asked by a number of entities what the position of the city of Pueblo is. So we'll probably come back with some information on that bill. That bill is being carried by Colorado Springs legislator, Senator Liston. So we'll want to talk to you about that. The other two pieces were we know that there will be an interest from the city are around taxes. That was a major part of the governor's state of the state. As you know, they had a special session on property tax. It was a short-term fix. And obviously the governor's commission will do their report this coming Friday with recommendations and legislation to follow. The other area that I know that was raised last year, even though we were really following that air bills, are around criminal justice. The governor formed a blue ribbon panel on that. And he expects recommendations by March. There will probably be appropriations or money set aside for any bills that involve criminal justice. And we also believe that that is another opportunity for the city to avail itself of resources to fight crime and criminal justice. So we know we gave you a lot of information. We know we're not going to have that much time with you during the Monday sessions. One thing that we will promise you, if you ask us a question during city council and we don't know the answer, we expect that you will receive an answer within 24 hours. On a Tuesday or Monday call, we'll have the answer for you within 24 hours and in your email box. We may not be able to answer it that day, but we hope to answer all of your questions in a timely fashion. So again, it's a privilege to represent the city, and happy to take any questions.
I have a question, Mr. Romero. We have this event in Denver on the 15th of February. And I noticed that you had indicated that the president of the council and the mayor were invited. What about other council members?
No, the one that I mentioned is for everyone.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, and so what we would coordinate, that's the Colorado Municipal League, but what we would like to do is add on to that workshop. If you want to attend that workshop, we'll send you some information on that. You have to register by February 9th. We've actually attended it. It's an excellent workshop, goes through all of the bills, but what we'd like to do, we'd like to piggyback on that Municipal League presentation and do a day at the Capitol where we would have you come into the Capitol, go onto either the floor of the Senate or the House, be introduced by our local legislators, and then actually participate in the sense of if there's a particular bill that's on the calendar and you want to testify, or actually go to committee hearings. We represent multiple clients. We always think the day at the Capitol is really an excellent way to build a better relationship with legislators. Obviously you represent a segment of government, but if that's something you want to do, we have a little bit of time to do that, and we will obviously work with city staff to get that going if you'd like to do that.
I would like to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, for presenting. Anyone else from council? President Aliff?
When can we expect to get this information? Because I haven't gotten anything with a bill tracker. I don't know, is anybody else? You guys all have it? Huh? Yeah, I haven't received anything. So okay.
Thank you, President Aliff. We will send that bill tracker out. We sent out some information. Normally this city staff require that we send that by Friday at noon. We hadn't gone through the first bill tracker process on Friday, so you will get the big. Let me just make sure with Ryan or Alec when they'll get the bill tracker.
Anyone else?
Oh, hold on, just a minute.
We can send that. We can send that again tonight, and it'll be attached to the documents that we send on Thursday or Friday.
Thank you.
And yeah, and President Aliff or any members of City Council, if you have any trouble with maneuvering around that bill tracker, it's called Capitol Watch. We think it's the best software out there. Just give us a call. You have our contact information or emails just saying, hey, I need some help with this, and we'll do a quick tutorial.
Councilor Martinez?
Yeah, so similar to Counselor Latino, I don't know if we need to take a vote if we're all going to go up to Denver, or give direction to staff, I guess, or to Mr. Romero to start planning that. But I would be interested in a day at the Capitol as well. Additionally, I think, Mr. Romero, I think your idea about having our delegation on some of these calls is a fantastic idea. So we hear from them as well, what their priorities are and what they're thinking. We get the opportunity to attend the monthly legislative breakfast, but I think that having them discuss what they're currently working on, what they're voting on in a forum like this, plus the public can see it too. Gosh, what great transparency. So I'd be interested in that as well.
Thank you, Councilor Martinez. And we're excited about that. We've been asked by members of the delegation. They've never presented to City Council, and they've asked. And so if you are all interested, we'll, you know, it takes the pressure off of us for about 5 minutes, but we'll take 5 minutes out of our 15 minutes and they get an opportunity to have one-on-one with you and tell you about some of their priorities and you get a chance to you know, build a relationship and ask them some questions. So I don't, Madam Chair, however you decide to get back to us on whether or not you want to formalize this or we'll check back with staff, just let us know and we'll get all of that in the works.
Thank you, Mr. Romero. For those members that do want to attend, I'm sure we can set up something through Tracy or Alyssa to take count so that we can make arrangements to go to attend this session. Ms. Solano?
Madam Chair, certainly. The invitation came today from CML, and I'll forward it electronically if you didn't get it. It's a flyer for the legislative workshop on February the 15th, I think is a Thursday.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to say, Mr. Romero, thank you so much. Thank you, gentlemen, all of you. Alec, you hit the bills right on the head that I had questions about. So you answered my questions before I even needed to ask them. I think as a body up here, we are interested in anything that hinders our ability as a home rule city to exercise our authority. And so I noticed that you had those two bills. One bill that was really interesting to me was on opioid antagonist that they're talking about distributing through the schools. And I know that I could read in the bill that they were considering Narcan and overdose prevention amongst students in the schools and on the buses. But also when I look up antagonist and throughout some of the other things, they're also considering harm reduction, you know, such as needles and so forth. Do you know how that, can you send us something on how that bill actually reads? If it's, sometimes it's the messages are hidden in the bill, and just wanting to see what that really covers. And that was HB 24-1037.
Okay, and we'll get you that information, Madam Chair. The other one that you will see, and it is very controversial. It didn't make it out of the interim committee this summer, is harm reduction sites. That is where somebody could actually go into a reduction site and inject the drug. That bill will come back this year, and the governor had difficulty with the bill, and I don't know whether he would still veto the bill, but you will have an opportunity to see that bill again. And it wasn't part of the interim committee because they didn't have a majority of the votes, but harm reduction centers are coming back as well. So we'll get you that packet of bills that came out of that interim committee. And if you have any further questions about that one, please let us know.
Yes, and I'm sorry. Oh, it was HB 1003. Also, just bravo. Thank you. I think you've covered everything that we're looking for, especially like I said, anything that we need to legislate against in order to protect our ability to exercise our home rule authority here in the city of Pueblo.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes.
I was just going to mention one thing. As you were talking about harm reduction centers, there is a bill that has been introduced 1028 about overdose centers and allowing local communities to determine whether or not they would like to have overdose prevention centers. It's coming out of Denver. I think CML is going to take a position on it. I'm not sure what that position is yet, but if Mr. Romero is going to be putting bills together, I think that might be one that will be included on that same thing.
Okay, we'll add it. We'll add it.
All right. Yes, I noticed there was calling for decriminalization of some drug paraphernalia and so forth. As a community, we're concerned about that because of the rampant use of drugs and drug addiction here in our community. And needles have always been an issue. Used needles, discarded needles in our environment. So thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you for your time, Madam Chair, and congratulations to the new members on City Council, and congratulations to President Aliff, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your time.
And you're welcome to come in and visit us at any time. You're always welcome here.
Thank you.
Next, we are going to be discussing CIRSA, Ethics, Liability, and Practices for Elected Officials. And we're welcoming Mr. Sam Light up to the podium to do his presentation. Thank you. Hello, Mr. Light. How are you this evening?
Thank you, Madam Chair, President Lino, council members. Very good. Thank you again, Madam Chair, President Aliff, council members, Mayor Gradishar, staff. Thank you for having me out. My name's Sam Light, and I'm Deputy Executive Director and General Counsel for CIRSA. I know you recently had an election, had some new members on council. Congratulations to those of you that are newly elected. So as mentioned, I represent CIRSA, and CIRSA is an acronym which stands for the Colorado Intergovernmental Risk Sharing Agency. I know most and probably all of you are aware of CIRSA, but we're the city's insurance provider for property and casualty coverage. And among the other services that we provide our insureds, our members, is periodically we visit and provide elected and appointed officials training. So that's the purpose of my visit this evening, particularly for the new folks, but it's a little bit more background on CIRSA. CIRSA is not a commercial insurance provider. We are what's called a public entity self-insurance pool. Our only members, our only insureds are Colorado cities and towns and affiliated entities. To give you a sense of that, we provide the property and casualty insurance for the city of Pueblo, or the Pueblo Department of Health and Environment, or the Pueblo Regional Building Department, the Pueblo Urban Renewal Authority, and the Housing Authority. So those affiliated entities that are part of your structure, we also provide coverages for them as well. Feel free to go to our website, www.cirsa.org, for more information about CIRSA. There are a couple of handouts coming around as well that I'll mention during my presentation, the primary one of which is a copy of our Ethics, Liability, and Best Practices Handbook for Elected Officials, which I hope you find to be a useful resource for you in looking at some of the important risk issues from that governing body, that legislative body perspective. So again, CIRSA, we're very proud and appreciative of our membership with our members, because we only insure cities and towns. We are very proud of the fact that we think puts us close to our members and in understanding what your insurance and risk management needs are. We value greatly our longstanding relationships with our members. To give you a sense of that, the city of Pueblo first became an insured with CIRSA in 1986, which is just a few years after our organization was formed. So thank you for your membership in CIRSA. My presentation this evening is going to be some suggestions for risk management, kind of at the 40,000 foot level. They're organized as suggestions for success that we hope will enhance your effectiveness and success as elected officials and as members of the city council, and in turn help you reduce risk for yourselves in the organization. I'll talk briefly about the role of elected official. We'll talk about organizational structure and liability, transparency a little bit, and then I'll just mention a couple of comments about ethics and due process, just to get those issues on your radar. And I do believe you had some onboarding activities earlier as well, and you may have gotten some of this information at that time. But with regard to ethics and due process, we actually do separate trainings on those issues. So given the limited time we have this evening, I'm just going to touch on those issues a little bit. I do have to make one caveat, which I make during all my presentations, though I am an attorney. This is not an attorney-client discussion. This is only a training resource. I'm happy to take questions as we go through my material to make the training as helpful to you all as possible. Finally, I've organized my presentation around what I call suggestions or commitments for success that I hope will help your success as a council and also help you manage risk. So with that, I'll start with my first suggestion. That is, it may not sound like much of a risk management suggestion, but committing to the role of public official is an important aspect, right? You all know that when you took that oath of office, you're no longer just a citizen of the city, right? You're now a government official, and from a certain perspective, that is a 24/7 job. Certainly have the personal life and enjoy that, but as we know, in the eyes of your constituents, in the eyes of your citizens, in the eyes of individuals that you take counsel from and that know you're on the council, they will always perceive you to be a member of the council, a representative of the council as an institution, and a representative of the city. And as they should, of course, your words, your deeds, your conduct matters, leaves an impression, has an effect. When you legislate and you're passing laws that affect people's lives, right? Sometimes when you have a citizen interaction, if that interaction doesn't go the way they thought it would, for them, that might leave a residue, right? And in a particularly difficult situation, it may even create a liability situation. So it's important to recognize that that hat of public official is from that perspective, always on, right? Particularly for the new members, but as you know, as you do your work, you're going to interact with the citizens. And sometimes they may want to interact with you on some legislative issue that council has not yet even discussed. And they may be saying to you, well, no, I know that, council member, but I'm interested in your personal opinion. And what's your personal opinion? And you may even say, well, this is my personal opinion. This is my personal opinion. This is my personal opinion. What are they filtering? Council member, council member, council member, right? So that understanding that you'll always be viewed as a representative of the council as an institution, I think is an important aspect of understanding risks around that relationship with the city. Of course, now that you are council members, you're no longer an outsider to city government. You're now insiders. From a risk management perspective, that of course has this aspect to it. Once you're on the inside, the council's laws, the city's ordinances, your rules of procedure, they all stick to us as members of the legislative body. And we don't have the luxury of saying, well, I didn't like that rule, so I'm not going to follow that rule. We are bound as fiduciaries to follow the laws and rules that apply to how we do our work as council members. That doesn't mean that certain rules or laws can't be changed, and the legislative body has that prerogative, but you have to follow the appropriate legislative process to change the rules. You don't want to be changing them on the fly or ignoring rules that clearly apply to how you do your work. Recognize also that in your role as legislators, you are representatives of the organization, ambassadors for the city, and fiduciaries, right? That's the legal word we use, right? Fiduciary, that obligation to put one's own interests aside and put the interests of the organization that we serve as a fiduciary above all other interests. And sometimes that's not going to be that easy. Sometimes, particularly during a particularly emotional issue or a hot button topic, you may be getting input from all directions. People during public comment may be saying, council, do this. And someone else, the next speaker says, no, do exactly the opposite. Or maybe some issue comes up and there's a sense from the people who are coming before you that there's urgency to it and council needs to do something right away. But from where you sit as the legislative arm of the organization, I think one of your powers and prerogatives is to always take the time that you need and get the information that you need that will help you make decisions, right? That serve that fiduciary role that you fulfill. So if that means, even in the face of a sense of public urgency, you feel like, well, we need more input from the mayor on what the options are in this area before we legislate, or we need to consult with the city attorney to understand, where the risks are with respect to this or that proposal that someone would like us to pursue, right? Your power and prerogative is to take that time and use it to your advantage. So I would encourage that to you. It does have a risk aspect to it. So sometimes decisions that were made without complete information, or there's a sense that afterwards maybe that was not ripe yet or was passed or adopted too early, sometimes can create risk issues as well. Okay. Recognize this is true for everyone within the organization, but particularly at the elected and appointed level. Government officials are responsible. One of the products you deliver is good governance, right? For the newly sworn in members, before I break that down, I'll ask this question, maybe a good question for everyone. Do you like process? Do you like process? Right? In local government, sometimes we get a little bit of a bad rap. People say, oh, it takes a long time, or it's very deliberative, or why is the government decision making, why can't it this or that? But in local government, that's by design, right? Process is deliberate and intentional in view of making the decisions that will serve the best interest of the city. So I encourage you to embrace process as a product in and of itself, irrespective of outcome, because after all, that's a product that you provide as a council. You provide a venue, a forum, this room, for people to come and talk to you about the needs and wants of the community. And as the legislative body, you have a unique role in helping decide how we put governmental resources on those needs and wants. So appreciate and embrace the process as a product in and of itself. And also recognize that delivering good governance, both in terms of building faith and trust in the citizens and also reducing risk, is, I think, built on a couple of core civics principles that I've listed here, right? So if you commit yourselves to the civics principle listed on the left-hand side of the slide, I think by and large, the legal issue that's attached to that, or the risk issue that's also mentioned on the slide, will take care of itself. So by way of example, commit yourselves to openness and transparency, and we'll have few, if any, claims, disputes, lawsuits around compliance with the open meetings law, open records laws. Commit to predictability and even-handedness in applying the laws that you've adopted. Commit to fundamental fairness. From where you sit as a legislative body, that issue probably doesn't come in front of you too much, but once in a while, you're going to hold what we call a quasi-judicial decision. I think you had, as an example, one of these at your December meeting, where you made a decision on a rezoning for some property. Once in a while, someone may stand up in that hearing and say, I object to something about the process. And recognize that staff's there to support you in that, but also recognize that one of your responsibilities then is just to make sure we slow it down. And as the decision-making body, make a good record of how we handle that procedural objection to make sure that it's been cleared, right? And that our hearing record shows, someone stands up and says, I think there's a problem with notice. We take a time out and have a discussion with the attorney or the clerk or the director who's presenting that item to make sure that all the procedural issues have been handled properly. And then finally, may not sound like a risk management principle, but I think mutuality of respect goes a long way. Right? Commit to mutual respect with each other as council members, with the staff that you interact with, as the citizens that you interact with. Internally, that includes things like making sure that as a legislative body, no matter how different your opinions are from each other, that we always feel like our deliberations, our discussions are a safe spot, safe place for every member to feel comfortable and free to express their own views on any legislative matter coming before the council, irrespective of how different, right? And in the claims world that we deal with, there are some claims, not many of them, but some of them that have this foundation where the claimant feels like there was a lack of respect. There's going to be situations, of course, where citizens will leave your meetings and they will disagree with the decision that you reached or the law that you adopted. They may go home and say, I'll never agree with what council decided. But if they go home and say, in addition to that, these things, then what a great place to be. They may say, I disagree with what council decided, but you know what? I feel like it was a good hearing, a good discussion. I felt like I was heard. I felt like it was respected. What an awesome place to be in terms of faith and trust in yourselves as elected officials and the council as an institution. Conversely, people who have a different perspective of how things happen, right, may sometimes get mad enough to say, well, not only do I disagree, I feel like there was problems with the hearing. I feel like I wasn't respected, and I'm so mad, I'm going to see if I can legally challenge that decision some way or another. All right, let's pivot and talk a little bit about organizational structure and liability. An important risk management principle for everyone within the organization is to recognize and honor their role. That is to stay within their duties and stay within their authority. For the newly elected members, I certainly hope it wasn't your first question for the city attorney, but the question can arise, can I get sued in this job as elected official? And of course, the answer is yes. Right? The good news is we have very strong protections in Colorado for elected officials. We have, and here I'm just going to real quickly mention what your protections are from personal liability. That being the idea, can someone sue me and hold me personally liable for something that I did or didn't do as an elected official. So here in Colorado, we have a statute called the Colorado Governmental Immunity Act, and it basically says this. It says the city, and by extension, its insurer, CIRSA, will defend you and pay judgments entered against you for acts or omissions as a council member. Good news. There's always conditions to these things, right? And the conditions are those protections apply so long as we are within the scope of our employment and not acting in a willful and wanton manner. So two interesting phrases there. Scope of employment may sound odd from your perspective as an elected official, because you may be thinking, well, I'm not an employee, like the staff of the city. I'm an elected official. But scope of employment is simply the phrase that's used in the statute. And it really simply means this as a takeaway. It means everyone must understand and stay within their job duties. And within municipal organizations, right, that concept of allocation of responsibility permeates the organization. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. The other interesting phrase is willful and wanton. Those protections apply so long as you're not engaging in willful and wanton conduct. And willful and wanton conduct is simply this. It's conduct that's intentionally undertaken, that's designed to injure someone's legal rights and taken with reckless disregard for what their rights are. I have an even simpler way of describing it. I just call it bad stuff, right? And it's conduct, that's accompanied by an almost, evil motive, right? So we know what that stuff is, and we're going to stay far away from it, but it's important to understand that that concept is out there and that those protections can be lost if there is liability that flows from willful and wanton conduct, okay? The important aspect of those statutory protections and how it attaches to your insurance is to recognize that your public officials liability coverage follows the same concepts. It provides you, right, with coverage, protection against alleged wrongful acts, right, and other risks. But those protections apply to you in your capacity as an elected official, right? And the insurance coverage says that you're covered for wrongful acts that are alleged to have occurred within the performance of your duties within the scope of your employment. And there are exclusions from coverage for things like willful and wanton conduct or liability that flows from criminal or malicious acts or ill-gotten gain. So just recognize those are the outer limits to that. Recognize also that the Colorado statute is a form of qualified immunity. It's not an absolute shield, right? That protection can be lost in those circumstances that I mentioned. And then also, I've been talking about state liability. At the federal level, you may ask, well, am I protected against federal liability, right? In Colorado, at the federal level, there's also a similar concept of qualified immunity. I know that gets a lot of news and press attention in the area of police liability, but qualified immunity is a concept that applies to all governmental actors, including elected and appointed officials. And it protects you from liability insofar as your conduct does not violate clearly established statutory or constitutional rights of which a reasonable person should have known. The interesting phrase for you all from your perspective is those last couple of words, should have known. That naturally leads you to the question, well, how do I know, right? How do I know if we're getting into, potentially dangerous territory? That's where you have the resources of your city attorney and his team, right? I guess we have to remember that sometimes you have to give them a little grace when there is that answer that, you ask a question, can we do it? And the answer is, it depends. That lovely lawyer. Well, it does. It absolutely does, particularly in the area of constitutional law and risk. It's so fact specific, and the law around civil rights and what's allowed under the constitutional provisions that govern most municipal operations is very fact specific. But recognize you have that support and resource from where you sit, going back to my earlier suggestion, in addition, getting the information and taking the time that you need. If you ever feel like, even just one of you has a question about, are we getting on thin ice? Do we have authority in this area? Take that time to slow down and get the advice and options and information you need to help you in those areas. And then that's how we deal with those potential constitutional types of risks. But absolutely, in certain areas, I'll give you an example. I think I saw on an agenda, maybe you're talking about a camping ban or your camping ordinances, whatever that looks like, right? They had a lot of constitutional issues swirling around that type of issue, right? So if you have questions about what's our authority in this area, What has the court said about these or this types of restrictions? Your staff, your city attorney's office is there to help you in that regard. Okay. All of this probably begs the question of what is the city structure, right? What is the council as the legislative body? What is the council's job description? As you know, Pueblo operates as a home rule city with a mayor council form of government. I do encourage you to take a look at the charter provisions that have that allocation of powers and responsibility. I call it here on the slide, the difference between policy and administration. Your charter actually uses the words, the distinction between the legislative branch and the executive branch, right? The council is the legislative body holding all legislative powers unless otherwise provided in the charter. The mayor, in contrast, is the chief executive officer responsible for all executive and administrative functions. It's not that they're complete silos. In fact, they're mutually supportive, but it's a clear allocation of responsibility, right, between the legislative, right, role of the council and the executive or administrative role of the mayor's office. By charter, ordinance, and other enactments, you know, certain duties are exercised by the council and certain other duties and powers are exercised by the mayor, the city departments. Those are intentional. They help to define not only your organizational structure, but in terms of how they influence risk, they help define the scope of employment for everyone. Just to give you a couple of examples around that, your charter, we talk about what's one of the most important documents to the council as a legislative body, the budget, right? But in terms of allocation and duties and responsibility, your charter says, for example, that the mayor prepares the budget and submits the budget and administers the budget. But in between some of those steps, what occurs? Council adopts the budget, right? With regard to various departments, we know that all administrative functions have been delegated or assigned to the executive branch. I'll give you a simple example on that, within whose scope of employment, within whose job duties is it to decide whether or not some individual business owner who's building something gets their permit. Or conversely, if they're not complying with the laws you passed, it gets their project red tagged. That's for the building official, right? So whose job ain't it? Everybody else, right? And this concept of allocation of responsibility permeates the organization. I do encourage you, right, to ask for staff support on that issue. If you ever have a question, is this something that's within our role as council? Is this something that I should be getting involved with, right? And we mentioned those things for you in terms of protecting you from unnecessary risk. Shown in a kind of a graphic format, right? It does ask the question, where does council spend its energy and effort, right? That's in the ownership, the legislative aspect of the organization. The legislative body makes the laws, is involved in policy setting, the big picture. You're the forward-looking arm of the organization, thinking in terms of what general laws best serve the city rather than dealing with day-to-day operations. You're responsible for general ordinances, adoption of the city goals and objectives, the annual budget. You have certain powers for appointment or confirmation. And then you deal at that large level with the interest and assets of the city as a corporation. For example, I think I saw on one of your recent agendas, things like entering into intergovernmental agreements with other entities or purchase and sale of assets, right? Contracts over a certain level. The contracts below a certain level, I'm sure have been delegated, right, to your staff. So all interesting things to think about and look at. I've given you the citation to the council's powers here at the bottom of this slide, but I think getting out of the weeds a little bit, it's the council that's uniquely positioned as a legislative body, right, to have that longest time horizon in mind in terms of exercising our legislative powers. Where do we want the city to be in 3, 5, 10 years? What are the broadest interests at stake? Sometimes hard to identify if you have a very vocal minority, right? But take the time to think about those aspects in terms of fulfilling your fiduciary role. Okay. From a risk management perspective, role discipline is particularly important in the area of employee relations and administrative matters assigned to staff. Council members are not employee supervisors. We all know that, right? So you want to make sure you're not getting individually or improperly involved in personnel issues or in administrative matters that have been assigned to the mayor. That's actually enshrined in your charter. There's a section in the charter, section 3-58, H, which talks about the administrative relationship of council to the administrative service. You're not alone in having one of those charter provisions. In fact, almost all of the charters in the state of Colorado that I've seen have that type of provision in it, right? That make it clear that the council deals with the administrative arm of the organization through the mayor and does not directly or indirectly give orders to subordinates of the mayor, right?
Mr. Light, I have a question for
Yes,
you.
sir.
Am I not correct to believe that the council and a supermajority of 5 votes can overrule the mayor? I was on the strong mayoral format committee. Am I right about that?
I'm not 100% sure and I apologize.
I
for
think
that.
I'm right about that.
Certainly the city attorney, if he would like to.
In other words, a simple
But I-
4 doesn't get it done, but a strong 5-2 does get it done,
Yeah, I'll have to ask.
just like Congress.
Yeah.
Just like our legislative branch. Thank you.
You want to?
So if you want me to respond, Mr. Latino, you are correct. Councilor Latino, excuse me.
Thank
You
you.
are correct. A 5-2 majority, a 5-vote majority would be a supermajority of council and would have the ability to have what you would call a legislative override of any veto that was issued by the mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that's your charter provision. I encourage you to take a look at that. As well as the other provisions that talk about allocations of responsibility, both in terms of the retained powers of council, the ones that are within your scope, and then from where we sit at CIRSA's perspective on these issues, and when you have claims, right, we look at who the named defendants are, and sometimes we get, I guess, what I would call kind of over anxious claimants who will add defendants who really shouldn't be added. And as long as there's no evidence suggesting, right, that people were outside their role, we usually will have a discussion with claimants counsel that say, for example, from where you sit, hey, wait a second, you're challenging the denial of a business license or a liquor license. And for that, the appropriate defendants ought to be just the city and the licensing officer who made the decision. So why are you naming individual elected officials? And if we can hold up the org chart and the ordinances and show that you have no role within that decision, right? And there's no evidence to suggest otherwise, then we can get you out of that case quickly, right? But on the other hand, right, if we're losing sight of what's in our wheelhouse and getting inappropriately involved in administrative matters or a personnel matter or something like that, then you may end up getting ensnared in that claim, right? And we would rather not have that. I've never had an elected or appointed official who got ensnared in some type of personnel matter that was actually within the administrative arm ever come back to me after they, had to have their deposition taken or something like that and told us that was a lot of fun. Let's do that again. So respect that there are systems in place to support you and to deal with those personnel matters, but they've been delegated. And then thank you for the clarification on the mayoral veto power and then the legislative override for that. There's just some tips on this slide about those issues. The main takeaway is to think of the legislative body's job. Yes, we each bring our own perspectives. We each do our own ambassadorial work on behalf of the city, but at the end of the day, council acts as a council, right? And then from that perspective, it's a we job. We're each contributing our voices, but we're working towards the one voice of council, whether expressed by a 4-3 vote or a 7-0 majority, right? We're all working in that regard. Recognize also that elected officials, in fact, state law requires that any action you take has to be taken in a duly called and agendized public meeting. When you're doing your work in this room together, there are all sorts of legal privileges that also apply that help protect you in the event of a claim. There's legislative immunity, there's certain quasi-judicial immunities that apply as well. Recognize also that there are certain commitments, I guess, to personal conduct that may apply in this area. I think sometimes in terms of strengthening the council as an institution, right? The job requires certain sacrifices, things like setting aside a personal agenda when there is lack of support. For example, one may have said, I campaigned and was elected on this idea that we're going to have a new ordinance that does this, whatever that may be. But if we don't have the support of at least 3 other council members to come along with us, right? We have to be willing to shelve that individual legislative priority in view of the service of the work plan as determined by council. Recognize that once council has acted on a matter, right? Even if you didn't vote in favor of it, well, you certainly don't have to be the main cheerleader of that decision, but as a fiduciary, you cannot do things individually that undermine the decision of council, right? Certain decisions can't be undone without risk of liability. So if there's ever a thought of, well, let's reconsider this, or how can we undo this decision? You need to make sure you get legal advice and support on whether that can be done, and if so, how it can be done. Lastly, maybe this is more of an internal risk above my pay grade, but sometimes people call me because they ask, is there a statute or some rule that applies to this? But I think it's a wise council that amongst itself, right, keeps an eye up and talks with each other about the question of whether there are any perceptions of whether we have individuals who are getting ahead of council before council has spoken, right? Or speaking for council when the voice of council has not yet spoken, right? I think each of us, right, you may find yourself in that position at some point in time. So I think in terms of strengthening the council as an institution, it's always important to respect that concept that if council has not yet spoken on a matter within its legislative prerogative, no matter how insistent that citizen or person is, you might need to tell them, well, council hasn't had a chance to talk about this yet. So I don't know what the voice of council will be on that issue. All right, a couple of thoughts about transparency real quickly. As you probably know, you're all subject individually and collectively as a council to the Colorado Open Meetings Law. There's a lot going on in that statute, and we could spend a fair amount of time on that, but I just want to emphasize two aspects of the statute. The first is what I call the openness requirement of the Colorado Open Meetings Law, and we all know what that is. It essentially says that if 3 or more members of the council meet to discuss public business, that's a meeting that has to be open to the public. Okay? And then the second part that's important is to recognize that council action must be taken at a duly called public meeting. Okay. Recognize the statute says that a meeting includes any kind of gathering, whether it's convened in person, by phone, or by electronic means. When they added that phrase electronic means back in 1996, they were thinking email. And we're still thinking email, right? Because the questions about, is email appropriate? Can I use email for this or that? That's an important aspect. And the public sector is completely unlike the private sector, right? In terms of transparency, we all understand that the emails that we send and receive as council members in performing our jobs as council members, those are essentially public records, right? With some limited exception, our emails are open to public inspection. So recognize that, and recognize also that discussions by email are subject to the openness requirement. And that's why staff probably has some tool or tips around the idea of don't use email, right, to have a discussion that's required to be held in council chambers. I put a link to an article that we've written about that issue, and one of the handouts that I sent around was a little handout that I wrote about the use of email for elected appointed officials. Further talks about what the risk is and what some suggestions are around good practices for use of email. At the end of the day, right, if there's a violation of the open meetings law related to the openness requirement, then a claimant, right, can potentially ask a court to undo any action that was taken that was in compliance with the statute, can get their attorney's fees, which are not covered by insurance. We do provide some dollars for defense, but not for payment of attorney's fees awarded against you. And then, of course, maybe one of the most difficult aspects of a transparency related claim is if there was a violation, it's getting back faith and trust, right, in your commitment to transparency. So make sure you get appropriate support around those issues. Okay. Conversely, you are allowed to have executive sessions, right? Make sure you have good systems in place to make sure you're following all the procedural steps for executive sessions, and that you have good systems set up to protect confidential information. Your code of ethics says that confidential discussions in executive session, right, that information cannot be released except in compliance with state statute. So if you ever have an executive session, even if you voted no against going into executive session, and even if you're not in favor of whatever issue might be discussed in executive session, as a fiduciary, right, each of us is individually bound to honor the confidentiality as determined by the council. A good tool in that regard sometimes is just to ask before leaving executive session, presiding officer, where someone says of all the confidential information that we've talked about in this executive session, which, if any, leaves the executive session and who's our spokesperson. I think that's a good way to identify, right, and get that commitment amongst each other about what is confidential. All right, let's talk just a little bit about ethics. Recognize, right, that when you became council member, you became subject to the ethics rules governing your conduct. It may sound a little odd to say make them your best friend, right? But I truly believe that, right? Sometimes codes of ethics, who agrees with this notion? Codes of ethics seem to be written in legalese, right? And they're kind of in this, they seem like they're in this faraway place, right? But you want to take the time to plow through the code of ethics a couple of times, ask staff for their thoughts on how the rules apply or are to be interpreted so that you're prepared, right? The best thing with respect to ethics is to have a good working familiarity with the code of ethics so that you're prepared to spot potential ethics issues before they arise, right? And choose an appropriate course of conduct before it's too late, okay? So you actually have in your municipal code, a code of ethics there, and that you'll want to take a look at that. Just some of the topics to keep in mind. Again, we do separate training on this issue, so I just want to get them on your radar and not break them down too much. But remember, you have a conflict of interest rule, right? And we all know what that is, right? If some action of the council is going to directly and substantially affect our own personal financial interest, then we have a conflict of interest, right? And our obligation is to make sure we disclose, right? That interest, that we recuse ourselves from the council's discussion and vote, right? So take a look at that section. There's an obligation, of course, not to disclose confidential information or records or use them to further your own personal financial interest. There's some sections in the Code of Ethics about that. And then make sure you decline any gifts that seem connected to your service. The basic rule on that is don't accept any gifts, right? That a reasonable person would perceive, right, is intended to improperly influence you to depart from the faithful performance of your duties, right? Or to reward you for some action that you took as a legislator. Really intuitively, so much about staying in a safe place with regard to gifts is just understand timing and context, right? If the gift, doesn't seem like appropriate, it's by a gift from someone who's got something coming before council next week. Well, this week then is not the week to accept that gift. Keep some distance from that. Finally, recognize right in there, the front of your policy statement for your code of ethics, it does say that one of the purposes of the code is not only to set down the actual rules for dealing with actual ethics issues, but also to avoid appearances of impropriety, right? However that looks like to you, right? But in terms of risk management, from my perspective, it does encourage the idea of being conservative in matters of ethics to avoid not only actual violations, but appearances of impropriety. Because at the end of the day, fair or unfair, right? Like it or not, right? In the world of ethics, sometimes perception equals reality and reality equals perception, right? Recognize for the new members, you're not alone. You do have staff support, right? If you have questions about how the code of ethics applies to certain situations, there's resources on that. But do recognize that the attorney's office is not an individual ethics advisor, right? They're there to they can answer questions about how the rules work. But that input will be from the perspective of the city as an organization. Okay. Unless there are any questions on that, I'll move on to my last substantive suggestion. And this is just to get this topic on your radar screen. But as your charter says, the primary job for the council is exercising the powers of the legislative arm of the city government. But on occasion, instead of making general rules, passing legislation that applies to everyone generally, that's forward-looking, that doesn't apply to anyone in particular, sometimes you will make decisions that affect the rights of a specific individual who's in front of you as an applicant. And those are what we call quasi-judicial matters, where in that role, you're not acting like a legislator, you're acting more like a judge, standing in judgment of a particular application that's in front of you. Probably don't have too many, I'm not sure, but as an example, again, like a rezoning decision that comes in front of council. You know when those are coming because those are on the quasi-judicial hearing portion of your agenda, right? there was comments earlier during the legislative update about land use. Recognize that in that role, right, we as a council, you have this awesome power to make decisions affecting individuals' protected property rights. And in matters of land use, you want that, right? We're very proud and kind of selfish about that at a local level. We want local control, right, over land use. But if we want that authority, we need to make sure that we're conducting our hearings and conducting ourselves as individual quasi judges, right, consistent with the due process rules of engagement, right? So it requires that we sort of change our mindset and not do the things that legislators do. Like when we have a land use application for rezoning, we can't be out lobbying or being lobbied. We can't be out whipping up opposition or support. We have to remain neutral and not engage with people outside of the public hearing. Those sound like things that judges do, right? And for quasi judicial matters, it's the same concept at a local level. This all sounds a bit mysterious, but we all know where it comes from, right? It's the constitutional provision that says no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So commit yourselves to make sure you provide good due process for the applicants that come in front of you, and you'll be in a great place with regard to that risk. You'll never face that risk if someone says, well, I think my due process rights were violated and I'm going to file a constitutional civil rights claim for due process violation against the city. Here's a couple of tips in that regard, some that I've mentioned, some that staff can help you with. The last piece I want to mention around quasi judicial proceedings is there's that magic time in the hearing where, you know, the staff has made their presentation, the applicants presented their case, the public has made their comments, and it comes back to you all for deliberations. From CIRSA's perspective, we love when you all as the decision makers have a discussion on the record, a good deliberation amongst yourselves about why you're going to vote yes or no. That's where we're making the record that's going to defend you and carry you all the way through any court challenge, right? So even if the staff report, you know, is clearly a recommendation for approval and everybody said approve and all the reasons are in the written paperwork, we like, even if it's as simple as saying, yes, Madam Chair, I'll go first during deliberations. I support this rezoning because it meets, right, our criteria for rezoning, right? We've now got that on the record from the people, the 7 people who have the power to make that decision. If you're having, sometimes deliberations start off a little bit rocky, you know, maybe someone says, yes, Madam Chair, I'll start. I'm going to vote no because I don't like this. That's a bit rocky, but you know, we can get there just by asking each other. I call it Sam's rule of why, right? Why don't you, you know, one council member asked the other, why don't you like it? Well, I don't think it meets our criteria. Oh, okay. Well, we just keep going. Well, why doesn't it meet our criteria? And then when we have that discussion with each other as decision makers, we almost invariably end up in a good place. And staff is there to support you. If you're uncertain about what the criteria are, you can always, your prerogative. Staff, what are the criteria again for rezoning? How do they apply in this case? Planning director, again, explain to me why you think the original zoning was an error or what have you, okay? And there's a couple of bullets there for some more training on that. So I'll get out of the weeds and just give you a couple of concluding thoughts. So I've learned in my time at CIRSA that there are a lot of aspects of risk management that we can't control, right? And things like public perceptions, what claimants might do, the inclination of judges, the enactments of the federal or state legislature. But I think embracing wise leadership in the things that you can control as legislators and as a legislative body will support your success and help reduce your risk, right? Among those, just to give you a couple suggestions in that regard, of course, embrace your council rules and your core values, right? I think your core values on the council's website state much more succinctly and elegantly than I have here now some of the core commitments that will help you in the area of risk management, accountability, ethical, responsive and respectful, transparent, service-oriented. Those will help you. Committing always to mutuality with respect. Who agrees with this notion that there seems to be a bit more incivility in government? And sometimes elected officials are on, you know, the receiving end of less than courteous comments or social media, that kind of thing. So sometimes the job will require that you exercise civility, even in the face of incivility, right? But you're all in a great spot to do that. Do recognize that certain risks, in particular, some civil rights risk around the First Amendment. I don't know how we got to this place in our society, but sometimes people will do things maybe just to push your buttons in hopes that they get an overreaction, right? In hopes maybe that they think they might have a claim after that, right? But if we practice civility, even in the face of incivility, you'll always be in a good spot from protecting yourself from unnecessary risks. Also, as the ambassadors and the legislative body, it's maybe not a risk management thing, but touting the council's successes, the city's successes, right? I think that goes a long way in building faith and trust, right? It helps send the message that there's so much about things, suggestions or criticisms of what government's not doing right or doing wrong. I think it's incumbent on us within organizations to remind folks that great things are getting done on your behalf and help calibrate the tone around discussion of local government. I do think at the end of the day, at a 40,000 foot level, that does help influence risk. And then finally, always committing to the service of the city as an entity and the city council as a living and ongoing institution, right? Doing things that make the council stronger as an institution will always serve you well. So with that, Madam Chair, President and staff, I'll open it up for any questions that you have. Otherwise, thank you very much for the opportunity to come out and visit with you. The other handout that I put there that I haven't mentioned yet was there's a handout there about CIRSA and the services we provide, just to give you a snapshot of what we do at CIRSA on your behalf.
Thank you, Mr. Light. Any questions from council? Mr. Flores?
Yes, one of the areas that one of the areas that I worry a lot about is in situations where the counselors are in a quasi judicial position, especially on land use and zoning changes, that type of thing. And the concern is, in a period where housing in almost every community in Colorado is so volatile right now, but there's such a need for housing. And with most communities, that housing really is in the peripheral areas because your city is growing outwardly, and that's where you have your infrastructure. But as I see it, there are a lot of people that just do not want these additional subdivisions to touch their subdivision because they're concerned that they're going to bring in all those things they don't like traffic, like crime, whatever. They just like it the way it is. But there seems to be an overlap with federal statutes here now that dealing with issues of fair housing, especially when it comes to zoning and all that. And I just see the danger of us maybe declining or denying someone a zoning change or a developer that wants to build, and then finding ourselves, violating a fair housing federal law.
Yeah.
So I mean, have you had that kind of issue come up?
Most of our Federal Fair Housing Act claims that we see on behalf of members relate to claims by tenants already within housing. With respect to federal land use, where there's a category of land use applicant, it might have a stronger footing for a federal claim. We see that in the area of, for example, the religious land use statutes, right? Not so much directly in the housing piece. But what we will see around federal claims for a new development is an applicant might try to, quote, make a federal case out of what should otherwise be a state level challenge to a denial of their zoning or subdivision request. And their primary path to making a state level land use claim into a federal claim would be due process. So as long as we make sure we're making the right decision through the proper process by applying the appropriate criteria, right, we're going to be in a good spot, and it's going to be much more difficult for the routine development applicant or person opposing it to make a quote federal case out of what should otherwise be a state level, state court challenge to a land use decision. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Counselor Gomez.
As a new councilman, I was kind of watching a lot of the interaction between the public when they get up there and speak. And when they out different departments, I guess we can understand that. But what's the view that you have when they get personal and they start naming names? That's a little troublesome for me.
Yeah, it's, I'm not sure how we got there, but I'll let the council, the city attorney start and then.
So I want to be clear. So the city has what I would call an informal policy, but we can talk about this more at your retreat, whether council wants to formalize the policy of calling out of order any person who by name mentions a city staff member or in any way discriminates against a person or city staff member or proposes or speaks on issues that would inherently discriminate against any member of the community or members of the community. The typical policy, there is on the form in which you sign up to speak in public comment, there is an outline of this policy on the form. So any person who signed up would have seen that policy. And therefore, it is appropriate for the council president as chair of the meeting to call that person out of order and to end that public discussion at that point in time. I'll let Mr. Light speak about what kind of liability that may cause, but that has been the city's informal policy. And it was my intention to, at the council retreat, to have more discussion to determine if council wants to formalize that policy.
And I'll just add that there is the most significant risk would be to involuntarily remove someone who believes that they were exercising their First Amendment right. And those kinds of claims are very fact specific, right? You can, I think, have rules of decorum, but you're going to want to consult closely with the city attorney before memorializing any policy. And with respect to enforcing it, I would suggest that having someone removed from a meeting is kind of the last resort, right? If they're violating the rules of decorum, you want to consult with the attorney on each particular hypothetical as to whether that's something where we can cut the mic, tell them their time is over or something like that, right? But do recognize in this world, do you have three minutes during public comment? 5? So I get my 5 minutes and we know, here's Sam comes up for public comment and 30 seconds into it, that's not going to go very well. Sam's going to stand up and say, I can't stand local government and you're all crooks and liars and this and that. What do I get? I get another 4.5 minutes to say that. And that's my First Amendment right. From the citizen's perspective, that public comment period is one of the highest forms of protected First Amendment speech. There are some limitations at the margin. They can't be inciting a riot. They can't be using legal obscenity, right? But that's different than just using a curse word necessarily, right? It has to be different than that. And your city attorney will help you with that. So in terms of managing your own personal liability risk, even if it's a personal attack against you, I would encourage you to think about a couple of things. Then there's nothing you're going to say in response to that person that'll change their mind. So it may be better just to let the chair, when that 5 minutes is up, you just thank you for your comments and you move on to the next person. Because that person who's out to make that attack, they're not going to change their mind, right? And they may be doing things just intentionally, right, to elicit a response. If it's directed at council and the meeting is actually emotions are running really high and it's getting disruptive, probably one of the best powers you have is just to take a short recess. We found over the years in dealing with our members and helping them through these issues that person who's intent on disrupting the meeting or engaging in personal attacks, a lot of air goes out of their balloon once they realize the council is going to take a short break, let the room cool down, and they're done speaking, right? So there is the last piece, and your city attorney can dig into this issue. There's case law on both sides of this issue, but our 10th Circuit is pretty strong on the First Amendment side of the issue, and there is some case law around the question of whether a person can be subject to having their public comment period reduced or be held in violation of a rule of decorum for a quote personal attack. So that's something that needs a close look. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming in and sharing all this with us. You know, we heard it last year when we were first elected, some of us, and now are newly elected, and hopefully we can live up to what the code of conduct here on council.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
Congratulations again.
Thank you.
And next up, we're going to have a presentation from the Mariposa Center for Safety. Ms. Ferguson, if you'd like to approach the podium.
Hello. I always have trouble with this button, so I just wanted to make sure it was on. Well, good evening. I am Dr. Nicole Ferguson, and I am the Executive Director at Mariposa Center for Safety. Good evening, and thank you all for having me here tonight. If you all recall, the last time I was here was August 14th. It was my first day as the Executive Director at Mariposa. So I am happy to be back and see all of you, but it is not the best of circumstances. So please bear with me while I share some of that with you. Just a little bit about me, since I have been in my position in August at Mariposa. We've found a few things that I wanted to share with you all as City Council and other members of our community, and just kind of let you know what's going on. But my background, similar to Mr. Light, actually, I deal a lot with policy process. My PhD is actually in policy and leadership. And so I do a lot of work with ethics and community and due process. So that's me. But to get started, I think I first wanted to start with just kind of letting you know who we are at Mariposa Center for Safety. For those of you who are unfamiliar, we are formerly the YWCA. We changed our name and branding back in March for a number of reasons, which I don't know that we need to get into, but happy to share some more with you all if you are interested later. But these are the folks on our leadership team. So since I am new to this position, a number of these people are not. The people on this list you see before you, some of you may recognize their names. Many of them have been on our board for a number of years. Many of them are former employees of the YWCA. So me being new, I wanted to share with you who these folks are so you kind of know who you could reach out to if you have questions, comments, or concerns to follow up on anything we have to say tonight. But you're also welcome to reach out to me. So the reason I'm here this evening to discuss with you is a funding request. Currently, Mariposa Center for Safety has run into some financial issues. When I first started in August, I started finding some financial discrepancies in our accounting and books. It wasn't that anyone had done anything, I think, fraudulent. I think it was just a bit of a lax accounting system. And so it looked like we were owed some funds that we actually were not. And so we had a lot less funding than we thought we did, which I'll share with you more. Right now, we're asking specifically for $495,000 to decrease a funding gap that we found. $650,000 of that is for a boiler and chiller repair. As you all know, we are in the old YWCA building, the 100-year-old building on the corner of Santa Fe and 8th, and it needs some work. I have photos here. I didn't make enough copies for everyone, but if anybody wants those, happy to share those with you as well. And then in addition to that, we found a $200,000 operating expense that we need to kind of close that gap to assist with our work in the domestic violence shelter and Teresa's Place, which is our safe visitation and exchange. So to look at kind of some of what we've done with the funding that we've received in the past, I'll let you look at some of these numbers. Looks like our screen shrunk a little bit. I apologize. But these are the numbers that we have seen. You can see from 2022 until present. Of course, the 2024 numbers are a projection, but I'll give you a minute to digest this because there's a lot of information on this slide just to show you kind of who we've served, what we've been doing as far as meals, shelter services, crisis calls, et cetera. And again, these numbers will show we've been working with our shelter within Teresa's Place, which is our safe visitation and exchange services. And then we're also conducting training and outreach. I didn't collect or couldn't find any training and outreach data for 2022. I don't know if it occurred or did not, but I don't have any evidence to that fact. So I didn't want to just make anything up and add something that I didn't have proof of. So again, just some historical context. Again, I was appointed in August to my position as the executive director, started looking at some different things and realizing that some finances just didn't look accurate. It wasn't comfortable for me. We were having some negative balances. We were receiving late fees. There were things that just weren't being paid on time and reconciled appropriately with our accounting system. So I reached out to some different community partners around September, and they assisted us in hiring a consultant. When we brought that consultant on, because I am not an accountant, I don't have that background, we began to look at those finances and realized that there was an actual significant gap that we needed to cover, essentially to keep our doors open. In October, we worked a cash flow projection, which I'll show you here momentarily. And then I got to work on reducing as many expenses as absolutely possible. So I was able to recover just through the reduction of utility costs, reducing some cell phones that we had, other expenses that we were using, things we were paying for that we didn't necessarily need that we could do by hand. There was a particular point where I have served as our own maintenance person and repairing our own boiler and dishwashers and other appliances in the shelter that needed to be repaired because we couldn't afford to pay for them. And then we also, as many of you know, we're working on the construction in a daycare facility that is the property adjacent to us. That is 115 to 119 on 8th Street. And there were significant delays in the construction of that project. That project was supposed to house a daycare facility, which could only house around 10 children. We were told that it would be approximately 3 to 6 months from November or December until that facility would even have electricity, plumbing, ceiling, flooring, etc. So without having children in a daycare, as you can imagine, there were not a lot of opportunities for funding. We had exhausted all of the funding, which graciously the city had assisted us in getting us to the point that we had, but it was not enough to continue operations in that area. So to that extent, we had to lay off a number of employees. This has resulted in us decreasing our staffing. We have 8 fewer employees than we should have on our staff, and that's just to maintain minimal operations. So lastly, we decided as a board and executive committee that we should reach out to the city and county to see what we need to do to assist Mariposa in maintaining our operations as the sole provider of domestic violence services, not only in the county and city of Pueblo, but in the Southern Colorado area in which we all live. So that cash flow projection that I wanted to share with you, and this is a lot of information, so please bear with me. If you see the inflow, that is the amount there in the bold, that 114 that we anticipated receiving from our grants and other funders, foundations, donations, etc. Up at the top, you can see the months. We're looking at December, January, February, so on and so forth. Looking at this through the cash outflow, that is our salaries, expenses, utilities, all those other expenses that we have throughout the month. By the end of December, we would run out of money, according to this cash flow. That would put us at the beginning of January with only $16,000 or a negative balance of $16,000. And that includes cashing out every investment, every opportunity, everything that we have, with the exclusion of the one piece of property that we actually own, which is the building next door. So we looked at that time, and by June 30th, you can see there on the end in the very bottom corner, we would be $324,000 in the hole, essentially. So we knew that we needed to do something and figure out what that would be. Mind you, again, this is what I found in our finances in November, having begun my position in August. So I got to work. I cut as many expenses. I cut back positions as we could, with still maintaining the quality of operations that is expected of our clients and our community. And these are the numbers that we're now looking at. As of December 31st, we had $149,000 in the bank account, but we were still set to run out of money by March. So according to where we are sitting financially, fiscally at this very moment in time, Mariposa Center for Safety will run out of finances by March of this year. A little cut off there at the bottom, you can't necessarily see, but those numbers show had we maintained the staff that we didn't lay off, we would have already run out of money months ago. So this is just a bit of our justification as to why we had to let go the positions that we did and why we don't know that it's in our best interest to maintain operations of a daycare at this time. Essentially, we had to make the difficult decision to decide what is our mission as an institution and how do we keep the doors open and continue to provide services to our community. However, silver lining, we were able to close that gap a bit. As you can see now, we can make it through the end of the fiscal year with about $143,000. So I've rounded up a bit and asked for $200,000, and that will get us through June. Mind you, these calculations are based on grant funding. We are typically reimbursed by our grants. So what that means is that we have to spend the money to then ask our grants to write us a check for that amount of money. Sometimes that happens monthly, sometimes that happens quarterly. So I may spend $20,000 and not be reimbursed for it for another 3 months until that quarter ends, if that makes sense. So know that these numbers are always in flux. They are not stagnant. That's why some of these you'll see 1 month we have 198,000. 1 month we only have 97,000. That's why, because that shows that projection of us receiving those quarterly reports every few months as opposed to monthly. So here's where we are. We are continuing to raise funds every single day. We've reached out to a number of grant funders, not just the city and county and local government. We've also reached out to state and federal grant providers. We write applications and grants almost on a daily basis. We've reached out to another nearly 50 funders to see if they can help provide us with support, not to mention individuals in our community that care about our mission and what we do. We are continuing to evaluate our real estate and operations just to maximize those costs, reducing staff as is needed, which we're really trying to prevent doing any further. We don't want to lay people off. That's not good for our community either. But we are trying to keep our expenses as absolutely low and to the bare minimum as possible. But we cannot get past this $650,000 boiler fee that we have to pay if we want to keep our building heated, so that we can continue to work in it and don't have to be fearful of this frigid weather that we currently have. So again, some steps we're taking, we're evaluating our current real estate. We have a mortgage on the building next door where we were discussing putting a daycare. We've had conversations with Jeff and Joe at Pedco, and they said they'll help us try to find somebody who might be interested in buying, leasing, renting, figuring out what our options are in that space. We've currently gone out to bid on these repairs. I have gotten a repair, obviously, for the $650,000, which I have a copy of. I'm happy to share if anybody needs to see. But I've asked some of our providers that are, placing bids, just what is the bare minimum we can get away with just to keep our building heated? And that number is coming between $100,000 and $200,000. In addition to that, we're talking about consolidating space. We currently rent out the space where our shelter is located. We also rent out where Teresa's Place Safe Visitation and Exchange is located. We're trying to figure out if there's a way to condense those things into one building, or maybe possibly at least two and not three, so that we have fewer utility costs, fewer operation expenses, et cetera. And then, of course, the fundraising that I mentioned. So lastly, again, we need $200,000 for operations. We need $650,000 for a boiler. We know that this is a big ask, and I don't know that I can tell you how we got here, but I can tell you that I think my track record shows that I'm doing my best to minimize the impact that this has on our community, and I hope that I can ask you all for your help in this endeavor. So happy to answer any questions that you have.
Questions from council? Councilor Flores?
Yes. Did I hear you right that you hired a consultant or?
A consultant was provided to us by the Packard Foundation. When I spoke to them about our concerns, they were able to help fund a consultant to work with us. Yes.
What was the conclusion of that report?
Well, we are still continuing to work with him. He's actually working with us on an almost daily basis. And these are kind of the conclusions of that report was see what we can do to bridge that gap and start reaching out to as many fundraising opportunities as possible.
So the ask of 495, break that out for me. Is that 200,000 for operating? And then the difference for the repair of the boiler?
I think possibly a little bit of both. We went back and forth as a committee and as a board to have this conversation. My opinion is that we tell you what we need, and then you all let us decide what you think is in our best interest and the best interest of our community. But our board did not want to ask for $850,000, which is what we really need. So I think they were trying to kind of meet in the middle and compromise and ask for that dollar amount.
You know, the concern that I would have about giving you operating money is that that's gone after a year. You need, I guess, to explain to us how you expect to make that up for the next year, because this is going to be a continual expense to your nonprofit. And I guess that's the piece that has me concerned.
Yeah, I completely understand your concern. And I think we probably need to do more work. I think we probably need to work on these same cash flow projections through 2025, maybe even 2026 to show some sustainability and how we intend to do that. But where we are now is just trying to get through day to day. And so I think that $200,000 would buy us a bit of a cushion until we can get through June and continue to work on these cash flow projections and know where we sit again in the coming months.
You seem to be convinced that you will continually get grant money. I always thought grants you applied for, and there was a question as to whether you're going to get it. Some years you may not get it. So tell us about how you feel confident that you're going to be getting this grant money in the future.
So I think as the only domestic violence services provider here in this local region, I think that helps in our favor that grant funders are willing to provide funding to us. I agree that grant funding is not always promised, but I do know that we have some federal grants that are very promising that are upwards in the $1 to $2 million range. But again, it works on that reimbursement, right? So we have to spend the money to be able to get it back. But I'm fairly confident in speaking with at least those grant funders that we will be able to continue the grants that we currently have in place.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Counselor Gomez?
Is there a parent Mariposa National that's looking over this, or you just completely a Pueblo operation?
This is completely Pueblo. Yeah.
Counselor Martinez?
Thank you for that presentation, Dr. Ferguson. It's a vulnerable position, and I can imagine how vulnerable it is to come before us and the community to talk about it. So I appreciate your bravery in coming before us. I have a couple of questions. So I guess similar to Counselor Flores, so the 495 is just from the city. I'm anticipating that you're going to be asking the county as well, because that's what you said. Are you going to, is it going to be like a match? Hey, this is what we're going to do for the city, and this is what we're going to ask from the county as well. Can you talk about that?
Sure, that is correct. So we have asked, the county has a bit of a different process. We had to fill out a form online and then we await for their response. But I have completed that form and I'm waiting to hear back from them on their response of when I can meet with them and what that looks like for the county.
And are your clients at your main building right there? So I guess why I'm asking is because if there's no boiler and there's no heat, are clients staying there without heat right now?
The shelter is not located there physically. We use that office as our administration office and our case management office. It is where we receive and store all of our donations, but the shelter is in an undisclosed location that is not in the same spot.
Okay, because that was definitely concerning for me. Can we pull up the slides again, Clyde? The great data that you presented that was broken up by 2022, 2023, and 2024, I guess I'm a little confused because 2024 just started.
For the community served data?
Mhm.
Yes. So that is a projection of what we anticipate. So
Oh.
typically when we write our grants, that we have to tell them, here's what we think we're going to do with this funding. And so those are the numbers kind of based on how trends have been working that we project. That's probably what we will do with the community.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess that makes way more sense. Can you share what your vision is for Mariposa Center?
I think my vision is to create a long-term sustainable agency that people can rely on, that we know will always be there and provide domestic violence services at the bare minimum. I would love for us to grow and be able to provide additional services in the future, but I think it's incredibly important that we stick to our core mission and provide the services that we say we will, which is domestic violence, family abuse, sexual trafficking, sex assault, any of those kind of support pieces.
That's what I was asking really is what is you know, I know that the childcare was such a great idea, and I'm so bummed to hear that. But I can see what you're saying, that it strayed from the agency's mission. So the agency's mission is truly to serve families who are experiencing domestic violence in a pretty rapid response. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you're serving all of Southern Colorado.
That's correct. Actually, we're serving the entire state. So when it comes to the numbers you see for safe exchanges, there are a multitude of counties. So if we're working on a safe exchange visitation program and say one parent lives in Denver, another parent lives in Pueblo, we're still engaging in those exchanges, even though some of the parties may not all live in Pueblo. So we do work throughout the state.
And I guess I have the same question as Councilor Flores too, is that, you know, even though it's a new fiscal year starting July, it's just, 30 days after June. Can you talk a little bit about how this bridge of $200K for operating and the grants? I'm assuming you have your own grant writer on staff. Like what, help me get there.
Yeah, so we do have a director of development who assists us with grant writing, but we also work with external contractors who help us write some of the more difficult federal grants that can be more time intensive. So sometimes we do have to reach out to other experts that assist us with that. But again, we know that at least one of our grants that provides $600,000 over the next 3 years is a continuation that has, they won't promise, of course, but they're very confident that if we continue to show support that we're doing the work that we're doing, that we can maintain that grant. We're also working with our partners at Catholic Charities to maintain another grant that we have that also provides $737,000 over a 3-year period, which we would be partners in sharing those resources with the community. And that's not to mention, we obviously work with CSAC, we work with the city, we work with a number of other funding agencies that help provide support for us that we have been awarded funding for the upcoming year. So there are some funds that we know we will be receiving. We just haven't received all of our foundations and awards and things for the coming fiscal year.
And I know that you mentioned some federal grants, and I know that we worked a little bit on HUD, or I tried to connect you with HUD. Was that HUD grant just for the childcare center?
Yeah, so the HUD money is a little tricky. The HUD situation is a $1.5 million grant that we have received. We do have it. But the money was specifically to turn our existing pool area into a daycare. With these current changes, we're trying to figure out if we can turn that space and still continue to use that funding to move Teresa's place into that space so that we can still use the $1.5 million without losing that HUD funding. It's just been very difficult to get a hold of HUD. I'm currently working with Senator Hickenlooper's office to get contacts with those people because the entire state is owed around $700 million that none of us have received today.
Okay. I mean, it's definitely concerning, even just looking at these numbers, that these individuals and children may not be served come July if there's not bridge gap. Can you help me understand or paint a picture of what that looks like if you have to shut down?
Sure. So, I mean, currently we have hundreds of people. We have 496, 500 and some odd individuals who alone use our shelter services. So that would be an additional group of homeless people on the street that have nowhere to go, or people who are forced to live with their abusers because they have nowhere to go. That would be 60 to 70 children who would have nowhere else to go because they have no additional resources in our community. I could go on, but I think you get the point that there is nowhere else for these folks to go if we shut down. Thank you.
Counselor Latino.
I have a real difficult time when it comes to young people, especially children. They're victims of adults' actions and reactions. So what we're talking about here is when I grew up in Pueblo, Colorado, the Young Women's Christian Association was a swimming pool with a recreation center. Now we become a housing facility and we're taking care of parents and kids. Is that what you're telling me? I mean, that's what I'm seeing here. And you're looking for hundreds of thousands of dollars to even open the doors. You know, I can't say no to young people, but I think we have to be realistic. We're at a point in time in this city where we're taking care of everybody, you know, and everybody shows up for funding. Again, I have a compassionate heart, and young people mean the world to me. I spent my whole career with them, and I was raised on Goat Hill. So it wasn't far for me to walk to the YMCA or the YWCA at the time. We're looking for all kinds of federal and state funding, and you're here looking for a lot of money. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars for a boiler. Is that what we're talking about? $650,000 for a boiler? Wow. Who from the city is helping you from the city itself? Not the 7 council members or the mayor, but who's helping you? Who are you working directly with?
I'm not sure I understand your question. Like,
The question is, you're here tonight asking us, but who have you worked with in the city? Who's been over there from the city? I haven't been there. The last time I was there was for an event. It's been a couple of years ago when I was here. Or there, excuse me. So I think you need a real strategic plan, and I think your board members need to be here too, as well as you. Instead of having you come here, they should be sitting here as well and be able to answer questions. I don't want to say no to kids. I don't want to say no to the YWCA. Young people mean too much to me. They're the victims of adults' actions and reactions. We have to help our kids. But when it comes time for homeless people and the fact that we have that kind of population in this community and the things that they're doing, I think it's time for us to do some real, strong, hard looking at situations. That's where I am.
Ms. Solano, did you have something to say?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Councilor Latino. I received a phone call into the mayor's office. I'm requesting some time to visit with Dr. Ferguson, and the board chair did come to our meeting. And they brought the first initial budget shortfall, which you had amended now since we met in December. And my direction was, I will take this information to the mayor and to the internal ARPA committee, as I don't know if recovering from COVID dollars would be available for this kind of bridge gap of assistance. And then, of course, my next direction is to a work session chair to present the funding request to City Council. We still don't, without this presentation this evening, the city attorney still has not been able to, without the detail, to confirm whether ARPA dollars would be available for any kind of bridge assistance or not. And I think you probably have more information as a result of this evening.
Again, it's the thought process with me is it's one thing for kids. It breaks my heart. It's another thing for adults. You know, I can't say no to children. I can't. But we have to be realistic, and we have to be organized, and we have to be factual, and we have to have figures. You know, she's presented a lot of figures. She's looking for a lot of money. A whole lot of money. And we have other organizations in this community that we need to work with. Again, I can't say no to children, but when we're talking about adults and we're taking care of them as well, that's a whole nother situation too. There's jobs out there for them.
just in response to that, I appreciate your comments and I certainly understand where you're coming from. I do want to note that there are a couple of members in the audience who are board members and they are present. They didn't intend to speak, so they didn't come here with me, but they are present. Additionally, some of them were ill, so weren't able to be here. But I just want to note that these aren't just children that we're talking about. For example, in 2022, the 496 individuals served, those are victims of domestic violence that sometimes can help their positions and other times can't. I could tell you a number of stories, hundreds of stories in which individuals have been victims of violence in which their abuser has kept their money. They all have jobs. Some of them probably make more money than some of us in this room. But when you make a paycheck and your abuser keeps that from you and prevents you from handling the finances, then you end up in a shelter. So please don't assume that the people who we're asking for funding for are not trying to help themselves, because they absolutely are. They just need some assistance and somewhere to go for a very short period of time until they can figure out how to get access to the funding and the things that they've earned, or go to another state where their families and other supporters are. So sometimes this could be very short-term assistance that we provide, but please don't misunderstand that these aren't people who are just asking for a handout, because they certainly are doing very well. Otherwise, they've just been victims of abuse and need our help.
Mayor, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I think, was it last year or the year before, we made $154,000 available in ARPA funds for the daycare center. And the daycare center never opened apparently, correct?
That's correct.
Has that money been spent already?
Yes, it has.
Not on the daycare center, on something else?
The money was spent on the daycare center. So we hired 3 staff positions, assuming that the daycare center would be open very quickly. And we very quickly learned that permitting for a daycare center is quite extensive. And we've had a lot of difficulty getting construction in the space completed. So a lot of that funding was for salaries for people who were hired.
But they didn't do anything.
They created lesson plans and worked on some other items, but yes, so, and those are the positions that we've since laid off because there was no need to keep them.
Right. And I guess the other thing is the 2024 budget for the city of Pueblo grants the Mariposa $65,000 in non-departmental budget requests. That money, I assume, has not been spent yet because you haven't gotten it yet, right?
I believe it was 55,000 and no, we've not yet received it.
55? Okay.
That's correct.
Councilor Flores.
I wanted to ask you, how much space do you need for your administrative staff?
I don't know that we need a large amount of space. We probably do not need the size of the building that we have. I'm assuming that's the line of questioning that you're going
in that direction.
Yeah. So we've looked into this, and part of it is we own that building outright. We don't owe any money on it. So fiscally, it likely makes more sense for us to bring all of our staff into that building as opposed to shutting it down and moving it out somewhere else. But we're certainly open to other options if people know something else that we could do with that space. In talking with the folks at Pedco, we're not really sure that that's a viable option, but we're open to what other options.
The one thing that comes to my mind is the new venture that United Way is going, in which they now have a building, which is, in my mind, is exactly for this kind of situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you need to visit with Shauna Farmer and see if that's an option for you.
Mm-hmm.
I've always liked your building. It has a lot of historical significance in the city. And I think that's another, since you don't utilize it for residential purposes anymore, that should be a huge consideration for your board.
Mm-hmm.
is selling that building.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at another smaller spot for your admin, and maybe not a purchase, but a lease.
Mm-hmm.
That would certainly reduce a lot. And I think somebody that would be, I think that building would be a gen for it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the cost would be discounted by the amount of work on the boiler and other things like that. It's just, I'm just thinking out loud right now, but.
No, I absolutely agree. And I have had those conversations with Shauna. I don't know that she's in a position or that the United Way is in a position to make any of those decisions at this current juncture. But I think that's something that we could certainly explore moving forward, because I don't disagree. I think it's going to be difficult for us to find a buyer for that building.
Councilor Graham.
Thank you for that presentation. And looking at the numbers, can you specify around about how many of these people are Puebloans?
As far as shelter goes?
Yeah, like when we talk about the 496 individuals served, because you talk about serving the region.
Mm-hmm.
Can you break that down a little bit to people that are from Pueblo?
I would say close to 100% for the shelter people. Where we start serving other counties and other communities is at Teresa's place. So those numbers are a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was looking into looked up a few things, and I saw that the Pueblo YWCA has been in existence since 1916 here in Pueblo.
That's correct.
And then you came forward and you changed the mission. Does the mission affect the grants you receive in your grant funding, because maybe your mission doesn't match the requirements of grants? I mean, what happened to where, what's happening with your ability to receive grants?
I think that actually expanding our mission has helped allow us to provide an opportunity to apply for additional grant funding. So for example, we don't only serve women, we can also serve men and youth and runaway and homeless youth, which was an expansion under Mariposa that we weren't able to provide under the YWCA. So there's a number of things that we've been able to expand that's actually allowed us to provide more grant funding services. And I don't think that our issue is the inability to receive grants. We have almost $2 million that we're able to receive, but again, we have to spend it to be able to reimburse it. So what we're asking for is a bit of a cushion so that we can make those expenses and then get reimbursed for them.
Oh, so you actually have the grant funding available, but you said you have to spend the money. So you want the money from, you're asking for the money so that you can spend it and then you get reimbursed.
That's correct.
And yeah, I just haven't, you didn't show that though as it's almost like an asset that you don't have yet. I didn't see that on your bookwork was pretty quickly went across the screen. And the 1.5 million for daycare is not really going to be accessible to you at this point because you're no longer having daycare. Did you spend any of that money yet?
No, we've not touched that funding. As I said, we're reaching out to HUD to see if we can kind of change the scope of that project so that we can still utilize those resources, revamp the pool, and then again, move some of our services into that larger building so that we're not paying rent and utilities in another space that we use for Teresa's place.
But is it for daycare?
No, it would be for visitation, which is childcare in essence.
I see. Okay. Did you have something, Councilor Martinez?
So are we looking for staff direction from this presentation? Or Ms. Lano, it sounded like you had some things to follow up on with legal and ARPA.
I can say affirmatively, based on what I've heard tonight, this wouldn't be eligible for any ARPA related category. The specific ask of the cost for the boiler and the operational funds wouldn't be eligible under any existing ARPA category. I didn't have that information until tonight, so that's why the chief of staff couldn't provide that opinion.
Is staff needing direction?
Staff does need your direction from council, a consensus or direction or a reply to Dr. Ferguson. I think all of the above.
Yes, I think that we're looking at, there's an unfortunate thing here is we have new members of council that have not even been able to review the budget. They don't know where the money's coming from. And so and then you don't really have an actual amount because you're going to try to get some money from the county. So maybe we need to either look at revisiting it or putting it on the calendar to go through with an ordinance at a later date, allowing council to catch up with where, the budget, our 2024 budget and where it's coming from.
I believe there is an ask of 495.
That is correct.
That's the ask.
Oh, okay.
Because the end of the fiscal year is in 5 months, because domestic violence, families who have suffered from domestic violence need to get served, and Mariposa Center for Safety serves all of those families. Pueblo and Southern Colorado cannot afford, and our families cannot afford to have Mariposa Center for Safety go out of business. So I would like to see this on either the next agenda or the one after that for the 495.
Councilor Martinez, you do have the right to bring any ordinance forward without any direction from council. All ordinances that come, all asks and everything that comes in front of us should be moved forward. And then it gives the ability for council to make a vote, either yay or nay, rather than give direction as far. So if you would like to direct Mr. Hippolyte to put bring an ordinance forward on that, you have the ability to do so.
I guess I want to clarify for procedural procedurally in the past, like Ms. Lano just said, she's wanted consensus to move forward. Chairwoman Maestri, are you saying that we're doing away with that system and now
Well,
it's just
that's why we're
per-
going,
I'm-
that's why we're.
I'm not finished.
Okay.
That we're just going to move forward with one individual counselor bringing forward instead of moving forward as a whole with consensus?
Yes, that's why we're having some housekeeping done at the retreat moving forward, because everyone that wants to propose something to the city has the right to do so. And if a counselor wants to bring that forward, they should be able to. When we come up here and we give that kind of direction, it's almost like a vote. And I think it says a public perspective that, we're all for it. And then it can allow whoever's asking to be disappointed if it's not voted for, but it should be made public. It should be and have a public vote put forward. So that's all I'm saying.
Dr. Ferguson, I'm happy to bring this forward.
Okay. Yes.
If I may, for the purposes of staff, because of how big of an ask this is, it might be helpful for council to give an indication of what kind of funding or bundle of funding council would like to see the ask come from. And we can, Councilor Martinez, you can certainly reach out to me offline and we can put that together. Okay, good.
Because there's really only one place that it can come from at this point, right? Is the fund balance.
Again, I will say council has the ability to move money around in the budget as it sees fit, to cut it, to expand it, to shrink it, to move things from reserves. So I will leave that wisdom to council as to where it wants to come from. I would hate to be the one who authored an ordinance which suggested somewhere it should or should not come from.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Ms. Ferguson, have you been to CSAC?
Yes, we have.
And obviously they have not responded yet, or they're still meeting, right?
We did receive a response. We requested $140,000 from CSAC and were issued $53,000.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Gomez.
I'm just going way back from the beginning. I was unclear if you can clarify $650,000 for the boiler, and then you said it was a bid maybe at 150. Did I hear that right?
Correct. So
$500,000.
for the boiler itself is between $100,000 and $200,000 to replace the water system and all of the piping and everything that goes along with that, which is in severe need of repair. That's where the additional $650,000 comes from.
Okay.
Councilor Graham.
Can you provide those bids for us? I know you said you had one copy, but can you email them? to
Sure.
us directly?
Certainly.
And then this might sound strange, but I mean, is your building worth $650,000?
It's close to 1 million.
Okay, because it's a huge improvement for.
Right. Which again is part of our
Right.
concern, right? If
Yeah,
we find a
sure.
buyer, we have to fix the boiler regardless.
Are there other options that you've looked at as far as heating and cooling besides a boiler system and what that would look like?
We've gone out to bid by 3 different providers, and this is generally what they're all sharing with us.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
I wanted
Counselor
I
Forrest.
thought Counselor Latino had a really good question,
Mhm.
but I wanted to clarify this. The children are not in isolation and the adults are not in isolation. These children come to your center mostly with their mothers. I'm assuming you also handle some males, but so these are families, a mother and children. That's how you approach their problems. So when we help the adults in this case, we're also helping their children and keeping them together with their mother. I wanted to clarify that because it's not, they're not in your facility in isolation, and the children certainly aren't just there for daycare. That was another program, a completely different program.
Yes,
Thanks.
that is correct. Thank you.
Councilor Aliff.
Yes, thank you. The shelter is at the old YWCA?
No.
That's all administration, correct?
Correct. Administration and case management
Got
and donation
The
center.
boiler is broke at the YWCA.
Correct.
And I hate to keep calling it that because that's
We know
not
what you mean.
it is. But, it's Pueblo. That's how we identify things. So if I looked at the numbers correctly, the actual shortfall is $142,000 to get to the end of the year. So essentially, if the county would give you 70,000 and we gave you $70,000, you have operating costs through June. So in reality, the ask isn't for the absolute need is not for 600,000 or 800,000. The actual ask and what the dire need is right now is the 142. And I don't remember the exact number, but it was something like 142,000. So to me, that's more palatable as a council to say, we need to get you to June. We need to keep people sheltered, keep Teresa's place open. And a side note here, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole here, but Teresa's place is a Colorado Springs organization, right? I mean, isn't there a Teresa's place in Colorado Springs? So these are two different organizations. They're just both named Teresa's place. You know what I'm talking about. Okay. I was confused there because we had worked with them before. So are you in agreement that if you got 142,000, 71,000 from city council or the city and $71,000 from the county, you would be good to June?
Assuming nothing happens with the boiler between now and then.
But the boiler's not necessary for the shelter and Teresa's place. Is that correct?
That is accurate. Yes.
Okay, that's all
Sure.
I was
Yeah.
trying to get.
No,
at.
that's fair.
I mean, I don't disagree. You need your boiler fixed or you need to do something with the building. And I think Councilor Flores made a fantastic point of looking at the United Way space and so on and so forth, selling the building, but we're not your board. And we literally can only give our say so on that. So I would suggest that as a council that we focus on splitting the cost with the county on the 142,000 and hope that happens. That's where I would go.
Thank you.
Would council like to follow Councilor Aliff's suggestion? Councilor Martinez?
Dr. Ferguson, can you talk a little bit more about so you're in a historic building. That's one of the reasons why replacement of the boiler is so expensive. Do you have a plan B in replacing that boiler should these asks not come through? Like, what does that look like?
I don't know that we have an alternative at this point. No.
Okay. I can see what Councilor Aliff is saying in terms of, getting operational funds through the end of the fiscal year. I like what you said about, get the $20,000 extra cushion because, I was born and raised in a nonprofit household and I know what the reimbursement grant lifestyle is. I'd still like to give them their full ask of $495.
Go ahead.
I would follow up with this. They own the building free and clear. Okay, I don't think that it's the city's responsibility to refurbish the building or the boiler on a building that they own free and clear. In reality, they could go take a loan out on the building, which they own free and clear for 200,000, 150,000, make the payments on the 150,000 and have a new boiler, or not a new boiler, but a repaired boiler. Or whatsoever it takes to keep the boiler going. I think our responsibility lies in keeping those people sheltered and keeping those battered families together and in Teresa's place. And if by her own admission, 142,000 would take care of that, I think we should at this moment be prepared to do that and not commit to redoing their building. That's all I'm saying. I'm not arguing the fact that.
I completely understand what you're saying, Councilor Aliff. And I don't think it's to redo the whole building. It's just to redo to replace the boiler. My concern is that, and from my tours, my personal tours of Mariposa Center for Safety, that clients go there first and then are routed into services. Is that correct?
That is correct.
My concern is that we've had the coldest, past couple of days in recent history. And when families, including small children, battered women, are going there for routing, I don't know how long it takes, but there are clients who are still there, who are accessing those services, and staff who need heat.
I would suggest that you ask council if they would like to move forward with 600,000 or 400,000 or 70,000 and see which direction the council would like to say we should go, or no dollars for that matter.
So shall we take, Counselor Martinez, you want to move forward with your 495,000?
With their ask
With
of
their ask, okay.
495,000. And that's your ask tonight.
That is correct.
Counselor Flores?
Yes.
Counselor Graham?
I'm with the 70.
I'm with the 70. Counselor,
70.
Counselor Ayers?
I would be, I think we should move forward with presenting to a regular session. 70,000.
Okay. Yes.
If I may, forgive me for doing this because I'm the one who's going to have to do the work on the back end. Maybe it's appropriate at this moment to prevent it from looking like council is taking any kind of vote in this moment, to present two different versions of an ordinance, doing both, and allow council to decide when it votes which one it wants to approve.
That sounds good.
Okay.
That's why if somebody, that's why we say maybe we're going to revisit this a little bit differently on the direction. Because if a counselor wants to bring something forward, they should just bring it forward. And that way it doesn't look like we're already taking a pre-vote. Okay? Yes.
Do you have an estimated timeline on when you're going to go talk to your friends at the county? Or when that registration form or whatever is going to be viewed?
I don't. I was hoping to hear back from them today, but did not, which I'm assuming might be because of the snow. There might have been some delays, but I'm hoping soon, very shortly. And if I could just make one point to Councilman Aliff's point, we did reach out about some additional funding. We were available to find that we could get a loan of $242,000 against the building, but I believe that funding requires a match. So we would have to find the additional $242,000 for them to give us that loan.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.
Alrighty. The time is now 7:57 and we are adjourned.
Didn't give me an opportunity to say zero.
Yeah, right. Or